currently living in Austin, Texas. I'm the founder of a technology startup. We develop software that optimizes energy use in smart buildings. It's a venture I've poured everything into: sweat, tears, heart. If you met me today, you'd probably see a confident man, one who leads a thriving company and lives a life many dream of. But if you asked about my past, that's a different story. One not as easy to tell. A story that begins with the warmth of childhood, only to plunge, without warning, into darkness. See, I was born an orphan. I have no memories of my biological parents. Only one fact: they abandoned me at an orphanage on the outskirts of Dallas when I was just 3 years old. That's where my life began. Then came Raymond and Emily Holt, a middle-class couple. They adopted me and brought me into their home in Fort Worth, a charming little house with a white picket fence and a garden full of daisies. I still remember the first time I stepped inside that house. I was too young to understand what family meant, but I felt it. Warmth. Emily, my adoptive mother, had a smile like spring sunlight. Gentle, quiet, always humming some tune under her breath. She used to hold me in her lap and sing lullabies softly. There were rabbits in the forest, she'd whisper, brushing hair from my face. Tiny ones with ears longer than your arm. Do you want to hear what they did today? I'd nod, wide-eyed, and she'd go on with her stories. Raymond, my adoptive father, was a tall man, strict in posture and tone, but his eyes softened when he looked at me. After coming home from the bank where he worked, he'd change out of his suit, toss a ball in my direction, and say, "Come on, champ, let's see that jump shot." We played basketball almost every evening. I called them Dad and Mom, and in the tender heart of a child, I truly believed they loved me like their own. Those early years, they were like a pastel painting, faint and warm. I remember Sunday mornings, the smell of buttery cookies wafting through the house. "Can I lick the spoon, Mom?" I'd ask, standing on a chair by the kitchen counter. "Only if you promise not to eat the dough when I'm not looking," she'd tease, handing it over. Meanwhile, Dad would kneel by the doorway. "Let's tie those shoes right today, huh?" he'd say. "Left over right, then under." Got it. The backyard was my kingdom. Dad had built a wooden swing with his own hands and fixed it between two strong trees. "Gavin, you'll soar like an eagle," he laughed one day, pushing me high into the air. I remember the wind rushing past my ears, the sky blurring with the trees, and Mom waving from the porch. In those moments, I felt like I had everything: love, care, belonging. I thought I was the happiest kid in the world. But then everything changed. I was 6 when my mom gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, Jeremy and Leah. The day they were born, I stood outside the hospital room, clutching a yellow balloon that Dad had bought me. "You excited, bud?" he asked, looking down at me. "Yeah," I said. "I'm going to teach them how to draw cats, and play soccer, and maybe how to ride a bike." He ruffled my hair. "That's the spirit." When we brought them home, I stood by the crib and peeked in. "They're so small," I whispered. Mom didn't answer. She was too busy adjusting Leah's blanket, humming softly, her smile fixed on the babies. From that moment on, something shifted. Her eyes didn't look at me the same way anymore. That warm smile, once mine, was now entirely theirs. Dad, too. He came home, but now it was to bottle feeds and diaper changes. "Maybe later, champ," he said when I held out the basketball. But later never came. Our games faded. The bedtime stories stopped. The quiet moments with Mom vanished. And I began to feel like a shadow in the home I once called my haven. At first, I told myself it was just the busyness. Of course they were overwhelmed. 2 newborns, crying through the night, needing every ounce of care. I understood. Or at least, I tried to. So I helped. I mopped the floor when Mom looked tired, folded clothes fresh out of the dryer, even tried singing lullabies to the twins when she needed to rest. I'd peek into their crib, hum softly, and stroke Leah's tiny hand. But every time I tried to get close, it was like stepping into a wall. Cold stares. Words sharp enough to cut. Once, I knelt beside Jeremy at the table, guiding his little hand toward a spoon. "Like this," I said gently. "See, your fingers go here." Suddenly, the spoon was yanked from my hand. "Gavin, leave your brother alone," Mom snapped. "You don't need to do these things." Her voice wasn't just cold, it was distant, clipped, like I was some neighbor kid intruding where I didn't belong. I stood there, hand still midair, heart pounding. "I was just trying to." "You don't need to." She cut me off. Then she turned back to Jeremy, cradling him like I wasn't even in the room. I stepped back. My hands trembled. I didn't understand what I'd done wrong. Over the years, that feeling of being outside, looking in, only grew worse. Jeremy and Leah always had something new. Clothes with the tags still on, shiny toys with blinking lights. I got hand-me-downs, shirts with frayed collars, shoes with worn soles. One Friday, I mustered the courage to ask Dad, Could I maybe go to the movies with Jake and Marcus? They're seeing that new space movie. He didn't look up from his newspaper. You need to be sensible, Gavin. We don't have money to waste on frivolous things. I nodded slowly. Okay. But just a week later, I watched from the porch as he buckled Jeremy and Leah into the back seat, their faces lit with excitement. Where are you going? I asked. To the amusement park, he said. They've been good lately. Can I come? He shut the car door. Not today, Gavin. And just like that, they drove off, laughing, as if I didn't exist. I started to wonder, was I truly part of this family? Or just some obligation they'd once taken on? The breaking point came when I was 9. It was early evening. I was setting the table when I heard a crash from the hallway. I ran in and found Jeremy, then 3, standing over the shattered pieces of Mom's favorite vase. Jeremy, don't touch that. I rushed to him, gently pulling him back. Just then, Mom walked in. What are you doing to your brother? She screamed. He broke the vase. I was just. She didn't let me finish. You're just adopted, Gavin. Don't think you have the right to discipline them. Those words, they didn't just sting, they crushed something inside me. I stood frozen. My throat tightened. Adopted. Just adopted. I clenched my jaw, turned, and ran. Locked myself in my room and collapsed on the bed, hugging my pillow. The tears came fast, silent, soaking the fabric. That night, for the first time, I felt truly alone. I wasn't their son. Not anymore. Maybe I never really was. After that, I began to withdraw. I spoke less, smiled less. I avoided family dinners, stayed quiet during car rides, and disappeared into corners of the house no one noticed. But I found refuge among the shelves of the school library. Old books became my escape. In their pages, no one called me just adopted. I could be anyone, a knight, a wizard, a boy with a destiny. Despite everything, I told myself to be grateful. They gave me a home, food, clothes. I owed them. So I made a promise. One day I'd succeed. I'd become something great. I'd repay them, and maybe then, maybe, they'd look at me like a son again. The rest of my childhood became a quiet battle, a struggle to preserve whatever self-worth I had left. I excelled in school. I buried myself in textbooks and projects. Always top of the class. Straight A's. No one noticed. No one praised me. Meanwhile, Jeremy and Leah would scribble a drawing with crayons and Mom would beam, saying, "Let's put this on the fridge." She never hung anything of mine. But I didn't stop. I kept trying. One year, I entered the school science competition. I stayed up late for weeks, building a model of a solar-powered irrigation system. I won first place. The teacher handed me the gold-colored trophy with a proud smile. Great work, Gavin. You earned this. I smiled, holding it in both hands, and ran all the way home. I couldn't wait to show them the trophy. Mom glanced at the trophy and said, flatly, "That's nice, Gavin. Now go do your homework." That was it. No smile. No hug. Just those few words as she turned away. A week later, I watched her at the park. Leah had just won some silly game, tossing rings onto bottles or something like that. My girl is so talented. Mom beamed, pulling her into a tight hug, laughing like Leah had just won an Olympic medal. I stood to the side, the memory of the trophy still fresh in my hands. I felt invisible. Was I not good enough? Had I done something wrong? Or was it simply because I wasn't really theirs? Not by blood. Was their love for me always meant to have boundaries? I didn't know, and not knowing made it worse. I let the silence eat at me. Let the loneliness gnaw away at whatever was left of my fragile soul. But when I turned 18, a quiet, painful truth settled in my chest. It wasn't that I was unlovable. It was that they had chosen not to love me. And that hurt, deeply, but it also lit something inside me. A fire. I made a decision. Their rejection would not define my worth. I wouldn't live well to prove anything to them. I'd live well to prove it to myself. So the day I packed my suitcase and walked out of the house in Fort Worth, I didn't cry. I just told myself, "Gavin, this is your chance. Don't look back." And I didn't. I carried the scars of that childhood like silent tattoos. But also, somewhere buried in me, a spark of hope. Hope that someday, I'd find a place I truly belonged. I got accepted into the University of Texas at Austin. Partial scholarship, enough to cover tuition. The rest I had to figure out on my own. My adoptive parents? They didn't give me a single dime. On the day I left, Dad stood by the front door, arms crossed. He didn't step forward, didn't offer a hand or even a smile, just nodded and said, "Good luck." Mom didn't even come out. She was in the kitchen, cooking for Jeremy and Leah. I could hear her humming through the window. I lingered at the gate for a second, just one, hoping for anything. A wave, a word, a glance. Nothing. It was as if I'd never existed in that house. I turned away, dragging my worn-out suitcase behind me, its wheels catching on the uneven sidewalk, and boarded a bus bound for Austin. I told myself this was the beginning. A clean slate. Austin in 2010 was a vibrant city, buzzing with music, tech dreams, and sun-drenched days. But it was also unforgiving, especially when you had nothing. I rented a tiny room on the east side of town. The walls were cracked and stained. The air smelled faintly of mildew. My bed, an old mattress on the floor. My desk, a wooden crate I'd found behind a restaurant. I couldn't afford new books, so I borrowed them from the library or begged hand-me-downs from upperclassmen. But I never complained. How could I? If I wanted to rewrite my story, I had to work, twice, no, 3 times harder than the rest. I attended classes during the day. At night, I worked as a server at a small cafe near campus. The shifts often dragged past midnight. By closing, my feet ached, and the smell of roasted beans clung to my clothes and hair. Some nights, customers snapped at me. "This is a latte," one man barked. I ordered a cappuccino. "I'm sorry, sir," I said, bowing my head. "I'll fix it right away." Because every tip meant a meal tomorrow. And on weekends, I delivered pizzas. I pedaled through Austin's blistering 40-degree heat, sweat soaking my shirt. I dropped off pizzas at well-kept houses, neatly trimmed lawns, porch lights glowing warm, kids laughing in the yard. Sometimes, I'd pause for a second too long, the scent of family dinners wafting out through open windows. I couldn't help it. I'd think of Jeremy and Leah, of how I once dreamed of being loved like those kids were. Eager arms waiting at the door, someone ruffling their hair, asking, "Did you have fun?" But I'd push those thoughts away quickly. The past was something I couldn't change. But the future? That was mine to build. College life wasn't easy. Not for someone like me. I was studying software engineering, a field that demanded focus, logic, creativity. But most nights, I didn't have much left to give. I was exhausted from juggling classes, jobs, and the unrelenting stress of barely making ends meet. I remember sitting at my desk, my wooden crate, with a borrowed laptop from the campus tech center. Lines of code blurred in front of my eyes. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, sluggish, as my eyelids drooped. One night, during a group project, I passed out completely. I woke to a hand shaking my shoulder. "Gavin, dude, you okay? You look like you're about to die," said Marcus, a guy in my group. I blinked, wiped my face, and gave a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a bit tired." That was a lie. I wasn't fine. I was barely holding it together, fighting not to be swallowed by the weight of debt, hunger, and the kind of loneliness that hollows out your bones. The student loan debt kept growing. Despite my scholarship, I had to borrow more every semester just to afford rent, food, basic survival. I lived like a ghost, quiet, unnoticed, eating instant noodles most nights, sometimes just a spoonful of peanut butter between classes. Once, I opened my wallet and saw just $3 inside. The electric bill was due that week. I sat in my dark room, the bulb already burnt out, and wondered, am I on the wrong path? Is this where I fall? But then I remembered the sharp sting of those words. "You're just adopted." No, I couldn't fall. If I gave up now, it would mean they were right. That I was disposable, worthless. I wiped the tears from my face, stood up, and went back to work. No matter how hard it got, I never asked my adoptive parents for help. I still had their phone number saved, but I never dialed it. Part of me knew they wouldn't care. The other part just didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me struggle. I told myself, even if the whole world turns its back on you, Gavin, you'll still live well, not to make them regret, but so you don't regret yourself. But some nights, lying on that old mattress, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I wondered if Jeremy and Leah were doing well, if my parents ever mentioned me. Once, I opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. I was 5, smiling big between mom and dad. Back then, I didn't know I was anything but theirs. Looking at that photo felt like pressing a blade to my chest. But I didn't cry. I folded it gently, placed it back in the drawer, and whispered to myself, "Gavin, you don't need them anymore." And slowly, painfully slowly, I began to find light in the darkness. At school, I made a few good friends. People who didn't know my past, but they treated me as an equal one. Calvin, a cheerful guy from Mexico, became one of my closest friends during those years. He had this contagious laugh and a way of making the room warmer just by walking in. Whenever he saw me eating nothing but bread or crackers during lunch, he'd shake his head and say, Gavin, you're skinny as a stick. Eat this taco," and shove one into my hand before I could protest. "Calvin, I'm good, really." No. You insult me when you say no." He'd grin, already unwrapping the foil. "You need meat, hermano." I'd laugh, give in, and take the taco. It was always spicy, always homemade, and somehow, always exactly what I needed. Those moments, however small, chipped away at the loneliness I carried. They reminded me I wasn't completely alone. I also began to fall in love with software engineering. There was something beautiful in its logic. a kind of order. In code, everything made sense. If it ran, it ran. No one asked if you were adopted, if you were poor, or if you cried yourself to sleep. It either worked or it didn't. And when it worked, I worked. I had value. I threw myself into it, joining every group project I could, entering coding competitions, even the ones that sounded impossible. Professors started to notice. They'd nod when I spoke in class. Sometimes even recommend me for student-led initiatives. One project with Calvin changed everything. We worked on a model for optimizing energy in smart buildings, trying to make lighting, heating, and power more efficient using adaptive algorithms. It was a novel idea back then. We stayed up for nights debugging the prototype. I remember Calvin squinting at the screen and saying, "If this crashes one more time, I'm moving to the jungle and becoming a goat farmer. Then I'm buying the first goat," I said, laughing. We didn't crash. We submitted the project and won second place in a statewide competition. That night, holding that plaque, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I can do something great, I told myself. But not everything was bright. In my junior year, I got a call from an old friend back in Fort Worth. I hadn't spoken to him in a while. "Gavin," he said, "I just saw Jeremy and Leah at the mall with your parents. They looked happy. You should call them. It's been a while." I forced a smile into my voice. "Yeah, maybe I will." But after I hung up, I just sat there, frozen, like the world had collapsed around me. They were still together, still smiling, living well, as if I had never existed. I stared at the wall, wondering, had they ever thought of me, even once? But no, I couldn't afford that kind of thinking. I shook my head, stood up, and went back to coding. I couldn't let the past drag me down. Never again. Graduation came. I walked across the stage with honors, head high, heart pounding. But with the degree came a harsh slap of reality. The job market was awful. A downturn in the economy meant companies were cutting back, not hiring. I sent out application after application, hundreds of them, from tiny software firms to massive corporations. Rejection after rejection, each one more politely worded than the last, each one cutting a little deeper. My student loan debt loomed, suffocating. I moved into a cheaper apartment, if you could even call it that. The walls were so thin I could hear my neighbors fighting every night, screaming, crying, slamming doors. I kept working, still a server, still delivering pizzas. But the money barely kept me afloat. One night, I was delivering pizza in a thunderstorm. The rain came down like punishment. I slipped on a slick patch of sidewalk. The box flew from my hands, and the pizza landed, face down, in a puddle. My boss docked my pay. The customer screamed at me. I stood there, drenched, staring at that ruined pizza on the pavement. I wanted to scream, to quit, to run. Is this worth it? I asked myself. But then I remembered the fire that had been burning inside me since the day I left Fort Worth. No, I wasn't giving up. I picked myself up, went home to that tiny dark room, and kept pushing forward. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. I came across an article about Austin's booming green tech industry. Startups focusing on renewable energy, AI-driven environmental applications, sustainable architecture. They were attracting huge investments. As I read, something clicked. I thought back to the project Calvin and I had done, the energy optimization system. A spark ignited. I looked up from my screen, heart racing, and called Calvin. "Remember that smart building project?" "Yeah, why?" "I think we were ahead of our time. I want to build something. For real." He didn't hesitate. "I'm in." And that was the beginning. With the little savings I had, and Calvin's unwavering support, I began building a small startup. Calvin and I worked day and night, pouring ourselves into the software we were building, code that could help smart buildings save energy in real time. Our workspace? My cramped rented room. We had a wooden plank propped up on an old beer crate for a desk. My college-era laptop barely worked. It froze constantly, especially when running anything more complex than a calculator. Calvin managed to bring an old desktop he'd dug up from his cousin's garage. It ran, but just barely. The fans wheezed like it had asthma. We lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. I can still smell that burned roast aroma in the air, our version of fuel. Some nights, I'd fall asleep right at the keyboard, forehead pressed against the keys, waking only when sunlight slipped through the cracks in the window blinds. But we kept going. Our idea was simple but ambitious. Build an AI-powered software platform that helped optimize energy usage in real time, adjusting heating, lighting, and systems in smart buildings to reduce cost and emissions. Turning that idea into reality, though, meant we needed funding. So when we heard about a startup competition in Austin, we knew we had to try. The first prize was $50,000. Enough to upgrade our equipment, maybe even rent a real office. We had 2 months to prepare. 2 brutal, exhilarating, 18-hour-day months. I focused on refining the back end, writing and rewriting code until my fingers ached and my joints burned. Calvin handled the user interface, design, and did all the market research. Late at night, over cups of instant coffee, we'd talk. You think we actually have a shot? I asked once, massaging my wrists. Calvin looked up from his sketchpad, eyes tired but lit with conviction. We're not just two broke guys, man. We've got a real solution. Real vision. That's more than half the teams out there. I wanted to believe that. The night before the competition, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Sunken cheeks, pale skin, dark circles so deep it looked like I hadn't slept in years. But my eyes still burned with something fierce. You've got this, Gavin, I told myself aloud, staring into that reflection. You have to. Then came competition day. A packed auditorium. Dozens of investors. Rows of rival teams. The air buzzed with nerves and ambition. I stood center stage, gripping the mic with both hands to stop them from shaking. Calvin gave me a small nod from the side of the stage. I took a breath, let it fill my lungs slowly, and began. I explained our product, the tech behind it, how it could save millions for commercial buildings, how it could cut emissions drastically, turning energy waste into intelligent savings. Then I paused, and I shared my story. I told them I was an orphan, that I'd grown up facing hardship, that I had slept in dark rooms, worked 3 jobs, and coded until dawn not just to survive, but to build something that mattered. I didn't know if it resonated. I just knew it was the truth. When I finished, there was a beat of silence. Then applause. Real applause. Calvin and I locked eyes. Our hearts were pounding. We didn't win first place, but we won second. $25,000. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to know we were on the right path. We used the prize money to rent a corner of a shared workspace in downtown Austin. Our office was a single wooden table, a few mismatched chairs, and a whiteboard covered with half-legible notes and arrows pointing to nowhere. But to me, it was everything. It was ours. I finally felt like I had a place to belong, a reason to keep pushing, a goal to chase. We officially founded our company. Calvin came up with the name, GreenSync Solutions. Syncing technology with the environment, he explained, proud. I laughed. I suck at names, so I'll just say yes. And that was that. Then, in 2018, came a real opportunity. We were invited to a green tech conference in San Francisco. It was big. The kind of event where major investors met promising startups, where a single conversation could change your life. Calvin and I could barely afford the tickets. But we looked at each other, nodded, and spent the money anyway. We knew this might be our last shot at the conference. At the conference in San Francisco, we pitched to a panel of investors from a venture capital firm called Eco Ventures. They listened carefully as Calvin walked them through our user interface, while I explained how our software used artificial intelligence to predict and adjust energy usage in real time, adapting based on occupancy, weather data, and user behavior. When we finished, there was a pause. Then nods. A few leaned forward with questions. Serious questions. The kind that told me we'd sparked something. Afterward, a middle-aged woman with striking silver hair approached us. She carried herself with quiet authority, confident but warm. Susan Miller, she said, extending a hand. I'm the fund director at Eco Ventures. I shook her hand, trying to mask the adrenaline still pumping through me. You two did something rare today, she said. You made AI feel human. Later that evening, she invited us to dinner. A quiet restaurant not far from the conference venue. Over plates of grilled vegetables and blackened salmon, we talked, not just about tech or funding, but life. Susan didn't just want to know the specs of our platform. She wanted to understand us. And for the first time, I told someone in the business world about my story. I didn't share it to win sympathy. I shared it because I needed her to know I wasn't doing this to get rich or make headlines. I want to create something meaningful, I told her, hands folded on the table. Something that lasts. Something that helps. Susan nodded slowly, setting down her fork. Her eyes softened. Gavin, she said gently, I believe in you. Not just because of the product, but because I see something in you most people lose after the first few setbacks. What's that? I asked, honestly curious. She smiled. You never give up. A week later, we got the call. Eco Ventures was in. They offered $1 million for a 20% stake in GreenSync Solutions. I sat in silence after hanging up the phone. Calvin shouted and hugged me so hard, he nearly knocked over the coffee table. That money changed everything. We moved out of my shoebox apartment and into a real office, nothing fancy, but it had windows, desks, a break room, and space to breathe. We hired 3 engineers and brought on a marketing specialist. I started learning how to really run a company, from managing finances, building workflows, and hiring, to simply learning how to lead. In 2020, we launched our first full-scale product. Our first client was a hotel chain in Austin. We installed the software, ran tests, calibrated the AI over a few weeks, then watched the results roll in. 3 months later, their energy cost dropped by 30%. Word spread fast. Soon we had contracts with office buildings, retail centers, and even a university in California. Revenue soared. 2 years after that first investment, GreenSync Solutions was valued at $10 million. Me, a guy who once slipped in the rain delivering pizza, was now the CEO of a respected green tech startup. One day, someone sent me a link. An article in Forbes. Notable entrepreneurs under 30. I clicked the headline, and there was my name. Gavin Morgan. I gave a small, dry smile. They had no idea what it had taken to get there. Success brought with it a life I had never dared to dream of. I moved out of that moldy, dimly lit room and into a small but bright apartment in downtown Austin. I bought a used car, nothing flashy, but reliable. No more biking through the heat, dodging traffic with a pizza box on my back. One day, I sent Calvin a wire transfer so he could buy a house for his mom back in Mexico. Gavin, I don't even know what to say, he told me over the phone, his voice cracking. You already said it, I replied, when you stood by me. But even with money, growth, and recognition, I never forgot where I came from. Some nights, when I worked late, I still ate instant noodles. Out of habit, or maybe nostalgia. I wore old t-shirts to work. Comfortable, familiar. And in my desk drawer sat that photo of the Holt family, taken when I was 5. Me, standing between Raymond and Emily, smiling like I belonged. I didn't keep it there because I missed them. I kept it to remind myself how far I'd come. Though my life has transformed, I still carry an emptiness inside. I haven't contacted my adoptive parents, Raymond and Emily Holt, since the day I left Fort Worth 11 years ago. In quiet moments, I sometimes wonder how they're doing. Raymond and Emily Holt. Despite the heartbreak their treatment caused, I can't deny what they did. They took me in. They gave an orphan child a home when no one else had. They may not have loved me the way I needed, but they still gave me a place to sleep, food to eat, a name to carry. And for that, I've always remained quietly, stubbornly grateful. I used to tell myself, one day I'll repay them. Not to ask for affection, not to beg for acceptance, but to prove I've lived well. That the boy they once overlooked became someone who didn't let the past define him. That idea, it began to grow. A gesture, a gift, something that spoke not in words, but in legacy. Then it came to me. A beachfront villa. Something grand. Beautiful. A space to breathe. A place where maybe, just maybe, they could look at me differently. Dad was turning 65. A milestone worth honoring. A life lived long enough to reflect on. In 2023, during a second round of funding for GreenSync, I sold a portion of my shares. It brought in a substantial sum. And with that money, I quietly started searching. No announcements. No hints. Not even to Calvin. I combed through listings, talked to agents in secret, kept my intentions folded tight like a letter to myself. Then I found it. A villa in Galveston. Just a few hours' drive from Austin. It sat right on the ocean. Wide glass windows framed the sea like artwork. The garden bloomed with bougainvillea and coastal jasmine. A porch faced the water, large enough for a row of chairs and a morning coffee. I stood there on a quiet visit, imagining Dad sitting on that porch, legs crossed, sipping his usual black coffee. I imagined Mom tending to the flower beds, humming the way she once did in Fort Worth, her hands in the soil. I imagined something more, too, an invitation. Maybe they'd say, Gavin, stay for dinner. Maybe they'd look at me, really look at me, and for once, see a son. This gift, I hoped, would bridge the distance time had carved between us. I worked with a lawyer to draft the paperwork. The gift deed, transferring the villa to Raymond Holt, was signed and notarized. No one knew, not even Calvin. I wanted the moment to be real, untainted by expectations. I counted down the days to January 4th, Dad's birthday. I knew I wouldn't be invited. I wasn't foolish enough to hope for that. But I decided I'd show up anyway. With the deed. With a heart full of trembling hope. Not expecting hugs. Not apologies. Just something. A glance. A nod. Maybe even pride. In the days leading up, I found myself pulling out that old family photo more often. There I was, 5 years old, standing between them, smiling as if the whole world belonged to me. Did they remember those days? When Mom sang me to sleep. When Dad pushed me on the swing. I didn't know, but I chose to believe that somewhere, buried under the years, they still held a thread of affection. And maybe this gift, this villa, would awaken that. When the day finally came, I left early in the morning. I drove from Austin, gripping the wheel tight, my pulse steady but loud in my ears. The white envelope with the deed sat on the passenger seat, pristine and silent. I wore a simple suit, navy blue, polished shoes, a clean shave. I hadn't dressed like that in years. Not since college presentations and investor pitches. But this time, it felt different. It felt like I was suiting up for something far more personal. For the first time in years. On the drive, I rehearsed my greeting again and again in my head. Happy birthday, Dad. I have a special gift. Simple. Sincere. I imagined the look on his face, surprise, maybe even pride. I pictured Mom's soft smile, maybe a glimmer in her eyes. And just maybe, in that moment, they'd see me as something more than the adopted kid. Maybe they'd see me as a true son. The 3-hour drive from Austin to Fort Worth gave me far too much time to think. My mind wandered down old roads, memories of childhood in that house. Sunday mornings filled with the scent of Mom's buttery cookies. Dad pushing me on the wooden swing, his deep laugh echoing in the yard. Gavin, you'll soar like an eagle, he used to say. But when Jeremy and Leo were born, all of it crumbled. I became a shadow, sidelined in the very home that once felt like a haven. Even now, all these years later, I still heard Mom's voice in my head, cutting and cold. You're just adopted. Still, I remain grateful. They took in an orphan child. They gave me shelter, a name, a start. And I needed, to repay that debt. This gift, I hoped, could erase the years of distance, even if just a little. I arrived at the old house in Fort Worth in the late afternoon. The white picket fence still stood straight, freshly painted. Mom's daisy garden was still there, neat and radiant. I could tell she'd trimmed it that morning, every flower in its place, just like she always kept things. Music and laughter spilled from the backyard. The party was in full swing. I parked down the block, took a deep breath, and walked through the gate. The white envelope pressed firmly between my fingers. My heart raced, steady, heavy, like a warning drum in my chest. I hadn't been invited. No one knew I was coming. But I whispered to myself, "You've come this far, Gavin. Don't stop now." The backyard was packed. Over 50 guests filled the space, friends, neighbors, relatives, my parents' colleagues. White-clothed tables dotted the lawn. A small band played cheerful jazz near the patio. The air smelled like grilled meat and lemon punch. I hovered at the edge of the crowd, trying to blend into the sea of color and chatter. But the moment I took a step forward, I felt the shift. Eyes. Whispers. And then, Jeremy spotted me. He stood tall, like Dad, dressed in an expensive shirt with sunglasses pushed up on his forehead. He was near the food table, laughing with someone from work. When he saw me, his smile curled. Not warm, twisted. Leah was beside him, in a bright red dress, her long hair tied up high. When her eyes landed on me, they sparkled, but not with joy. Jeremy raised his glass, loud enough for the crowd around him to hear. "Well, look who's here," he said, voice thick with mock surprise and sarcasm. "Gavin. Long time no see." People turned. Heads tilted. Conversations paused. Leah giggled behind her manicured hand. "Still remember the way home," she called out. The heat rose up my neck. "He's wearing a suit," she added, her tone shrill with amusement. "Don't tell me you're here to beg for a job at Dad's bank." Their laughter rang across the lawn, bright and cruel. I stood there, my face burning, the envelope nearly crumpling in my grip. But I didn't waver. I straightened my shoulders, forced my voice calm. "I'm here to wish Dad a happy birthday," I said. "And I have a special gift for him." Jeremy raised an eyebrow and stepped forward, his wine glass sloshing as he walked. "A special gift?" he repeated, drawing it out. "Really? Let me guess, a cheap tie? A self-drawn picture?" He smirked, giving me a slow once-over like I was a street magician trying to perform at a black-tie gala. Behind him, Leah leaned closer and added with a sly grin, "Hold on, Gavin. Dad's got a special gift for you today, too." Her eyes glinted like polished glass. "Bet you'll cry when you find out." They exchanged glances, giggling like schoolchildren guarding a secret. I narrowed my eyes. "What gift?" I asked, my voice laced with unease, the weight of something unspoken sinking into my chest. Jeremy just shrugged, his grin smug. "Just wait," he said. "Dad will announce it soon. Trust me, you'll want to see it before doing anything stupid." The word stupid hung in the air like a threat. Their tone, their faces, everything about the moment felt wrong. But then again, for the briefest flicker of a second, I wondered, could it be something good? A gift from Dad? After 11 years of silence? Could he be trying to make amends? I didn't dare let the thought take root. But part of me, the part that still remembered the swing, the cookies, the lullabies, wanted to believe. "I'll wait," I said, voice low but steady. Jeremy and Leah both burst into laughter, as if I'd told the world's funniest joke. "Good call, Gavin," Leah said with a wink. "Don't go anywhere." Then she tugged Jeremy back toward their group, their laughter fading into the hum of the party, leaving me standing alone in a sea of chatter and clinking glasses. I scanned the crowd, searching for the only two people who still had the power to make my heart stumble. There they were, near the main table. Dad stood in a tailored gray suit, silver at his temples now, still upright, composed. Mom wore an elegant floral dress, her hair pinned in a soft bun, pearls glinting under the sunlight. As I stepped forward, both of them looked up, and in their eyes I saw it. Shock. Pure, open, and unfiltered. Dad froze, his wine glass hovering midair like he'd forgotten what he was holding. His mouth moved before his expression caught up. "Gavin," he said, almost to himself, his voice stunned, as if seeing a ghost who didn't belong among the living. Mom's hand shot to her mouth. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice thin and trembling. There was no warmth in it, just disorientation and something close to panic. I swallowed the sting, forced a small smile, and stepped forward with the envelope in hand. "I'm here to wish Dad a happy birthday," I said, holding it up gently. "And I have a special gift." Dad glanced at the envelope, then at me. His eyes shifted, confused, uncomfortable. He didn't move toward me. He didn't reach out. Mom turned her face away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her dress. She didn't say another word. "Thank you, Gavin," Dad said finally. "Later." "Okay." His tone was flat, the kind you use with a stranger who's just handed you a flyer at the door. Then, as if I hadn't just traveled 3 hours, hadn't stood in front of them for the first time in over a decade, he turned and resumed his conversation with the man beside him, someone who wasn't his son. I stood there for a long second, the envelope growing heavier in my hand. I wanted to leave. I wanted to disappear. But I didn't. Not yet. I told myself, give the gift. Show them who you've become. Maybe that'll be enough. Still, I couldn't shake Jeremy and Leah's words. That mystery gift. That twisted anticipation. I needed to know. The party continued, but no one came to speak with me. No one offered me a seat. No one asked how I'd been. I was invisible, an uninvited memory they couldn't quite erase. I stayed near the fence, away from the chatter and laughter, my suit sticking uncomfortably to my back. I watched people eat from silver trays, sip wine, toss jokes across tables like I wasn't even there. Jeremy and Leah kept glancing my way, whispering, smirking. Every glance was a sting. Every laugh was a reminder of where I stood. Still, I held on to hope. I imagined Dad opening the envelope, reading the deed, seeing the house by the ocean, realizing that I had honored them in a way they'd never expected. I told myself, this moment could change everything. But deep down, a voice stirred inside me, quiet but sure. "Gavin, you're hoping for too much." Then it happened. The pivotal moment. Dad stepped onto a small wooden platform set up in the middle of the yard. He tapped his wine glass with a fork, the delicate chime cutting through the music. The crowd hushed. Laughter faded. Every face turned toward him. He smiled. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice warm and steady, carrying easily over the soft wind and clink of dishes. "Today isn't just my 65th birthday, it's also a chance to share an important decision." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded document, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," he said with a proud smile, "is my will." A hush fell over the backyard. Even the music seemed to pause. "I want everyone to know," he continued, his voice calm, assured, "that my assets, this house, my bank accounts, everything, will be divided equally between Jeremy and Leah, my beloved children." There was a smattering of polite applause from the crowd. I stood still, the envelope still in my hand, a hopeful flutter in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was still space for me. But then his voice shifted, cooler, pointed. "And by the way," he added, "Gavin, my adopted son, is here today after over a decade of absence. He says he has a birthday gift for me." His eyes locked on mine. My chest tightened. "But I think he's here to curry favor." A few people chuckled softly. "Too bad," he said with a smirk. "He's too late. My will is already set." Then, he twisted the knife. "Sorry, Gavin. Since you're adopted, I forgot to include your name in the will." Laughter erupted across the yard, sharp, unforgiving. Applause followed. Some cheered. Jeremy and Leah embraced, their faces radiant with triumph. I could see the glee in Jeremy's eyes as he turned to Leah, who was already grinning wide. I stood frozen, numb. The world spun around me, but I couldn't move. Was this the gift they meant? A public erasure? A will used like a dagger? I glanced at Jeremy, who leaned toward me with that same malicious grin I remembered from childhood. "Told you, Gavin," he said, barely hiding his delight. "Dad had a gift for you." Leah's shrill voice followed. I said he'd cry. Look at his face. They laughed loudly. The sound tore into me, cruel and unrelenting. Some guests looked at me, their expressions a blend of awkward curiosity and vague pity, but no one intervened. No one said a word. I turned to Dad, praying, "Please, say it's a joke. Say this was just to lighten the mood." But he stepped down from the platform, dusted his hands, and resumed talking to guests like I hadn't spoken, like I wasn't even there. Mom stood a few feet away, her hands clenched tightly in front of her dress. She didn't move, didn't blink. Her face was blank, but in her eyes, I saw it. Not guilt, not sorrow, just silence. And suddenly I was 8 again, standing in the kitchen, frozen as she screamed, "You're just adopted." Now, 25 years later, my adoptive father had echoed those same words, this time in front of everyone. Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes, but I clenched my jaw, forcing them back. No, I told myself, you will not cry. Not here. Not for them. I wouldn't give Jeremy and Leah the satisfaction. I wouldn't give my parents the power. I looked down at the envelope, creased slightly now in my trembling hand, and stepped forward. Every eye turned to me. The music had stopped. Conversations silenced. You could hear the wind rustle the daisies by the fence. I walked to the center of the yard and turned to face them, Dad, Mom, Jeremy, Leah, and the audience who had just applauded my erasure. I cleared my throat. I came here to repay you, I said, my voice low but carrying in the stillness. Not to beg. I raised the envelope for all to see, holding it like a banner in a battle I never wanted to fight. This, I said, is the deed to a beachfront villa in Galveston, worth $4 million. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I saw heads turn. Phones lowered. I bought it intending to gift it to you both, I continued, looking directly at Dad, then Mom. To thank you for raising me. I paused. I let those words sink into the very people who had discarded me. Dad stood frozen, his mouth parted ever so slightly. His wine glass trembled in his hand. Mom brought her hand to her lips, her face paling, the blood draining out like someone had pulled a plug. Jeremy and Leah weren't laughing anymore. Their smiles had vanished like smoke in the wind. But I wasn't done. I've worked my whole life, not to prove anything to anyone, but to prove something to myself. My voice no longer shook. I thought this gift would bridge the gap, make you see me as a son. I drew a breath, deep and steady. But now I see, it's not necessary. I locked eyes with Dad. His gaze flickered, confusion, maybe guilt, but it didn't matter anymore. With hands trembling but deliberate, I raised the envelope and slowly tore the gift deed into pieces. The sharp rip of paper echoed in the yard like a thunderclap. Shreds of that $4 million villa fluttered down to the grass, white confetti at a funeral for my final illusion. The crowd stood frozen, breath held, not a whisper or rustle among them. Jeremy's mouth hung open. Leah's eyes widened in shock. For once, they had no witty remarks. Dad took a step forward. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Not even a word. I didn't wait for one. I turned my back on them, on all of them, and walked out of the yard, through the crowd that parted silently as I passed. No one dared stop me. No one tried to speak. The music started again behind me, but it sounded hollow now, cheerful notes falling flat in the uneasy air. I heard hushed murmurs. That's Gavin, the adopted son. Did you see what they did to him? How could they treat him like that? But I didn't care anymore. I stepped out through the gate, my chest tight, but my steps steady. Climbed into my car, shut the door, and I drove. I didn't look back. Not once. The sun had begun to dip below the Fort Worth skyline, casting long orange shadows across the road. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but my heart felt oddly calm. No tears came, just silence. A strange relief settled over me. Like I had finally shed the weight I'd carried for so long. The burden of needing their love, their approval, their validation. I had come hoping for a moment of reconciliation. Instead, I had found clarity. In the days that followed, I tried to return to routine. GreenSync Solutions was thriving. We just landed a massive contract with a shopping center chain in California. Our team was growing fast, now more than 60 strong, and I moved between strategy meetings, software demos, and investor calls like a man completely in control. Media interviews, keynote invites, accolades, they came in waves. I smiled for photos, shook hands with partners, cracked jokes in the office kitchen. But every night, back in my apartment, the quiet set in. The old family photo I'd once kept in my drawer was gone. I'd tossed it into the trash the night I got home from the party. Couldn't stand the sight of those smiling faces anymore. But the memories clung to me. I would close my eyes and see Jeremy's sneer. Hear Dad's cold words, "Since you're adopted." I questioned whether I had done the right thing. Tearing up the deed. Walking out. Could I have taken a higher road? Could I have changed the story's ending, without adding another scar to my soul? But the more I turned it over in my mind, the more I realized the answer wasn't in their reactions. It was in mine. I had spent a lifetime trying to be worthy of their love. I was tired. The healing I needed wasn't about forgiving Raymond or Emily or their precious biological children. I had to forgive someone else. I had to forgive me. The little boy who thought if he just folded more laundry, sang more lullabies, scored higher grades, they'd finally see him. The teenage Gavin who left home silently, believing success would one day earn him a place at their table. And the man who still, even now, had hoped a gesture could rewrite the past. I found a therapist, Camille. Middle-aged, soft-spoken, her office lined with books and a worn green sofa that smelled faintly of lavender. At our first session, I sat stiffly, hands clasped tight in my lap. She smiled gently. Just say whatever comes to mind. I hesitated. Then I exhaled and began. I told her about being abandoned as a child, about Raymond and Emily, about Jeremy and Leah, about Fort Worth, about sleepless college nights and the smell of wet pizza boxes, about green sink, about success, and finally, about the birthday party. Each session, the words came easier. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I was furious, punching a pillow like a wounded animal. But Camille never flinched. She just listened. You've built a life to be proud of, Gavin, she told me one evening. But you need to let yourself feel the pain instead of burying it under achievement. So I did. I started journaling, something I'd never bothered with before. Each night, I'd sit at my desk and write. Just a few lines, sometimes whole pages. I wrote about Dad pushing me on the swing, about Mom's voice when she said, "You're just adopted," about the moment I stood in that backyard, surrounded by laughter, and tore up the gift deed in front of everyone. Writing helped me see clearly, not to blame, but to understand. I couldn't change them. I never could. The only thing I could change was how I faced myself. The pain, the silence, the longing, it all found a voice in those pages. And through that voice, I began to heal. A year passed since that birthday party. I didn't reach out to my adoptive parents, and they never called. Jeremy and Leah faded into the past like characters from a chapter 1 had finally closed. But life has a way of surprising you. It was a chilly March afternoon when I found myself in Houston, invited as the keynote speaker at a sustainable energy conference. GreenSync Solutions had grown beyond anything I once imagined. We were now recognized as a leader in green tech, and my name was on the banners. I stood on that stage, looking out at an audience of over 500 people, entrepreneurs, scientists, students, investors. I told them my story, not to boast, but to show what resilience could do. I spoke of growing up with invisible wounds, of being written off, of building something from nothing. I didn't mention Raymond or Emily. I didn't need to. I spoke of the boy I once was and the man I had chosen to become. When I finished, the crowd stood and applauded. A standing ovation. I smiled, nodding in quiet thanks. Not for the applause, but for how far I'd come. At the reception afterward, I mingled with investors, posed for photos, and fielded questions from students. The air buzzed with excitement. And then, as I turned to grab a drink, I saw her. An elderly woman stood just a few feet away, her silver hair tied into a high bun, wearing a knitted green sweater that made her look out of place amid the suits and formal dresses. But it was her eyes that caught me, soft, full of warmth, but tinged with something deeper. Regret. Sadness. "Gavin," she said gently. I blinked, trying to place her. Her face stirred a distant memory, one of cookies baked on Sundays and whispers in the hallway during family gatherings. "Aunt Monica?" I asked, startled. She nodded, offering a faint smile. "You remember me," she said, voice slightly choked. "Of course," I said. "It's been a long time." "I heard your speech," she said, stepping closer. "I'm so proud of you, Gavin. So proud." Her eyes shone, and she reached out, taking my hand. I didn't know what to say. Her touch felt sincere, something I hadn't felt from a Holt in years. "But," she continued, "I need to tell you something. About Raymond's birthday. About what happened after you left." We found a quiet corner of the venue, away from the clinking glasses and small talk. She held my hand like it meant something, as if to brace me for what was coming. "After you tore up that gift deed and left the party," she said, the entire mood shifted. It was like the music stopped playing, even though it didn't. Everyone was just stunned. I said nothing, just listened. "People knew you'd been doing well," she continued, "but no one expected that. A $4 million villa, offered as a thank you, and then torn apart like it meant nothing. But Gavin, it wasn't just the gift. It was you. The way you walked out. Not angry, not begging, just standing tall." She paused, as if reliving the moment. "Some of the guests," she said, "they started whispering. And not kindly. They began asking Raymond and Emily what kind of parents they'd been. One of Raymond's oldest friends, Gideon, you remember him?" I nodded faintly. He told Raymond to his face, "You've lost an incredible son." The words hit me like a stone in still water. "Jeremy and Leah," she trailed off, her eyes tightening. "At first, they acted like nothing happened. They laughed, mocked, said you were showing off. But after a few relatives got up and left early, disgusted by it all, Jeremy got quiet. He drank too much. You could tell it was eating at him. And Leah?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't say a word, Monica replied. She sat in the corner of the garden, arms folded, staring at nothing. Her face looked guilty, Gavin. Genuinely. I let out a slow breath, unsure what to feel. Anger? Validation? Sorrow? And my parents? I finally asked. Monica's eyes softened. Raymond didn't speak for the rest of the evening, she said. He just sat at the main table, staring at the torn pieces of paper scattered on the ground. I swallowed hard, unable to picture it. As I was leaving, she added, I saw him kneel down. He picked up the pieces, every last one, and he slipped them into his pocket. I blinked, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. Do you think? I started, but my throat closed. I cleared it and tried again. Do you think they regret it? Monica sighed, her voice quiet but firm. I believe they do, Gavin, but they're too proud to say it, too stubborn to face what they did. She reached out and gently touched my arm. Emily never mentions you, she said. Not directly, but I know this. She reads every article about you. Raymond, he's aged a lot since that night, Monica said softly. I think he knows he was wrong, but he doesn't know how to fix it. I sat there, silent, staring out the large windows of the venue. Sunlight streamed through the tall panes, casting golden streaks across the floor. There was a time when hearing that would have lit a spark of anger or longing in me. But now, I didn't feel angry. Not exactly. I just felt sad. Sad that we could have had a different story, one full of warmth and connection. If only they had chosen to love me as their own. If only they had looked past the label adopted and seen me as simply their son. But in that same moment, I was also grateful. Grateful for Monica, for her honesty, her kindness, her presence. Thank you, Aunt Monica, I said, offering her a soft smile. I'm okay, really. She leaned in and hugged me. A gentle, genuine hug. And for the first time in years, I felt a touch of warmth from someone in my adoptive family. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. After that meeting, I returned to Austin with a quiet heart and steady steps, continuing on the path I had chosen for myself. I didn't reach out to Raymond, Emily, Jeremy, or Leah. I didn't need their regret or apologies. What I needed, I had already found. Freedom, not from them, but from the belief that I had to earn their love. I found freedom not by running from the past, but by facing it, accepting it, and releasing it. In the time that followed, therapy became just one part of my healing. I discovered new meaning in helping others. I began engaging in charity work, focusing on supporting orphans and struggling families, those walking a path I knew too well. Eventually, I founded a nonprofit called Bright Path, inspired by my own journey, a path that began in shadows but reached toward light. The foundation offered scholarships for orphans, funded skill-building programs, and built community centers in underserved areas. On my first visit to one of our centers in East Austin, I met Miguel, a 12-year-old boy, skinny, with shy but bright eyes. His face lit up when he talked about his dream of becoming an engineer. We sat together at a rickety desk, and I listened. He told me about his mother, a janitor who worked double shifts, how he taught himself coding on an old computer at the public library. As I listened, I saw myself in him, a boy trying to rise above his circumstances, reaching for a future no one else could see but him. I awarded him a scholarship that day and promised to follow his journey. When he hugged me, whispering, "Thank you, sir," I felt a joy no money, no success, no Forbes mention could ever match. Charity work didn't just help others. It healed me. Each time I met an orphan child, each time I saw that glimmer of hope, I was reminded I wasn't alone. I had built a family, not in Fort Worth, but in the people I helped, in my GreenSync team, in friends like Calvin, who had stood by me through the hardest nights. Slowly, I began to slow down. I savored small moments, a morning jog by the river, a cup of hot coffee in my office, a video call with Calvin and his mother in Mexico, who still called me Mijo. And in those moments, I learned something I never thought possible. I learned to love myself. Not through success, not through public recognition, but by accepting that I had done my best. And for me, that was enough. I no longer needed the attention or validation of my adoptive family. That's my life story. A journey that began abandoned in an orphanage, passed through years of silence and struggle in a home that never truly welcomed me, and rose, through sheer will, to freedom. If my story leaves anything behind, I hope it's this: a resonance, a spark, maybe even motivation for you, to help you rise confidently in your own life. And I wish you this: the courage to face your past, the strength to move through pain, and the faith to believe that light always waits at the end of the road, if only you keep moving forward. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.